integrity, excellence, independence, and an industrial strength sense of humor. Ellerbee has educated and informed all age groups through her work as a journalist, author, producer, breast cancer survivor, and one of the most sought-after speakers in America. And she has received all of television's highest honors, including several Emmy, Peabody, and Columbia DuPont awards. Her NBC Overnight was called the best written and most intelligent news program ever by the Columbia DuPont Award citation. Ms. Ellerbee's company, Lucky Duck Productions, has for more than a decade created programming for network, syndication, cable, and public television. Lucky Duck's highly acclaimed news program for kids, Nick News, is watched by more children than all other television news shows put together, and has earned honors traditionally associated with adult programming. Ms. Ellerbee has also continued to pursue issues important to women and families in groundbreaking TV specials on topics such as breast cancer, voting, child care, money management, safe sex, and the dangers of tobacco use. She and Rosie O'Donnell teamed up to open a dialogue with young people about their feelings surrounding body image and the media's role in an image-obsessed society. And Ellerbee won her third Peabody Award when she and Katie Couric spoke with kids about the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Now she, Whoopi Goldberg, and Diane Keaton have teamed up to produce a 12-part series for HBO about the women's movement in the 60s and 70s. Recently, Ellerbee ventured into the world of fiction for middle school readers with Get Real, her 8-part book series about 6th graders who start up a school newspaper staff. Of course, Get Real isn't Ellerbee's first experience as an author. Her previous books, And So It Goes and Move On, were national bestsellers. Linda Ellerbee is a woman of spirit and determination who has enlightened and entertained us. When she was diagnosed with breast cancer on February 4, 1992, that spirit and determination only got stronger. Ellerbee snapped into journalistic mode, researching every aspect of the disease. Through it all, she lived out loud. Silence, she says, is not what I do best, and thank goodness. She speaks with wit and with wisdom about her experiences and shows others how to survive a changing world with one's heart and spirit intact. Please join me in giving a warm UniverCity welcome to Linda Ellerbee.
Thank you. First, thank you. Thank you very much. Is that mic working? Can you hear me? Good. I wish somebody had told me it was going to be outdoors. If I decide to come down there and start taking clothes off your back, you will understand, won't you? I am here tonight because I was invited to be and to come and to speak to you about breast cancer, and I am thrilled. But if you wanted to hear me speak about journalism, it's the wrong place. I want to start with a statistic that I find entirely frightening, but it sort of puts in perspective why we are here. Since 1960, the number of American women, that's American women, who have died from breast cancer is more than twice the number of all Americans killed in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Gulf War. And of that number, more than half have died in the last 20 years. Breast cancer has been on the rise since the 1940s, and nobody really knows why. But in the 1970s, when Betty Ford said she had breast cancer, the figure was 1 in 20. Today, that figure is 1 in 8. 1 in 8 American women will, during her lifetime, get breast cancer. On February 4th, as she said, of 1992, I learned that I had breast cancer. I lost both my breast and all my hair. My hair grew back. And I live as though the cancer were never coming back because nothing else seems to make any sense to me. Well, what do I know now? I know that trying to figure out that time often feels like trying to bite a basketball. You see, there's been so much good happen, and I did not start out that way. It has been a time of great change for me. and learning to live with changes. So I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts tonight on this subject of change and the subject of breast cancer and surviving. So I'm not going to start with my diagnosis of breast cancer. I'm going to start when I was 17 years old and believed that anything was possible. That's what I told myself. Anything is possible. Why? I didn't care if 2 plus 2 equaled 4 today. I was positive I would get up tomorrow and 2 plus 2 might equal 5. Like most young people, I didn't know much about change. You see, I thought change would always be a choice, my choice. Like many young people, I confused change with motion. They are not the same. I, for one, intended to keep my knees bent no matter what came along, and so I packed up my guitar and I looked to the rainbow and I clapped my hands to show that I believed in Tinkerbell, and I left Texas for the first time. Now, I went off to college. I lived in Houston, Texas. I went off to college at Vanderbilt University, which is, as you know, in Nashville, Tennessee. Hi. My mother in Houston said when I went off to Nashville, she said to all of our friends, "Oh, Linda Jane, she went east to school." Technically, she was correct. I was sent to college in 1962 for 2 reasons, the first of which was to get myself a husband. The second reason was to get myself an education so that if my husband died or left me in some less honorable manner, I would have, in the words of my time, something to fall back on. We could sing along. Well, I had such a wonderful time in college that I quit after a year and a half. In the Andes Mountains of Bolivia, I taught Quechuan Indians how to sing Onward Christian Soldiers in Spanish, a language neither they nor I understood very well, and thought about Che Guevara. I told myself, an enlightened missionary. In Memphis, Tennessee, I married the junior executive trainee. We lived in what I like to think of as garden apartment hell. Every night I cooked burnt orange dinners on my avocado green stove in my Harvest Gold kitchen. And some nights I sat in my Arctic white bathroom and held my breath till I turned Wedgwood blue. I was a model wife. In Chicago, I worked for an FM station, career girl, formed a band, folk musician, fell in love with a banjo player, fool. In Texas, I met the cowboy poet. He believed, in no particular order, in Jesus Christ, Khalil Gibran, and Karl Marx. He believed in making love, not war. Guess which decade this was. We moved to the Texas-Mexico border and made 2 babies in 2 years. I was the Earth Mommy. In Alaska, I left the commune in which we were living in order to write radio programs for a Republican politician after my cowboy poet left me for a 20-year-old Quaker vegetarian who didn't shave her legs. For the last 30 years, I have been a journalist, and since 1990, I have been the CEO and owner of along with Rolf, my partner, owner of Lucky Duck Productions. We produce for ABC and CBS, and if she said HBO, Lifetime. If you've watched the Intimate Portrait series on Lifetime, the women's biography series, we produce most of those. We produce a show for women's entertainment called When I Was a Girl that airs on Sunday nights. And of course, we have produced Nick News for 11 years. And I have to just take a moment here to say that my son produced a show for Nickelodeon for our series, in fact, a special called Faces of Hope, The Children of Afghanistan, which just won the Emmy for Best Children's Program of the Year. My life moved fast, you know, and sometimes I find that I wish... There. Am I back on? And sometimes I wish I didn't know now about what I didn't know then. In June of 1991, I discovered a lump in my left breast. I found it because it hurt. And I called my family doctor and I said, I have found a lump in my breast and it hurts. And he said, oh, thank God, because if it hurts, it can't be cancer. I didn't know that was a myth, and apparently neither did my family doctor. And I did not know how many women find their own breast cancer. And I did not listen to my own body, which was trying to tell me something. And so I did not go in for a mammogram. 6 months later, I was asked by a friend to speak at a fundraiser for breast cancer. And I told her that I would be happy to do so, but I didn't know much about the disease. I had never covered stories about breast cancer. No one in my family had ever had breast cancer, a statement my daughter cannot make. And so in preparation for that speech, I began to research the issue, and of course I came across the figure, which was, at that time, 1 in 9. And I thought about the lump in my left breast, the one that hurt, and therefore could not be cancer. And so I decided to go in for that mammogram. 1 in 9, 1 in 8, 1 in 20, 1 in 2,000. It does not matter if suddenly you are the one. When I was told I had breast cancer, I was devastated. Any woman who tells you different, I would check and make sure that she's breathing. If not, she's probably lying. My doctor kept talking to me after he told me I had cancer. I know that because I could see his lips move. But I couldn't hear a word that he said. Because I am a reporter, the next thing I did do was to try to learn about the subject. Well, the more I read, the more questions I had. And I would call the surgeon that my doctor had recommended with questions. And finally he said, you know, you've got all these questions. And there's this book by this doctor, Dr. Susan Love. And why don't you get her book? And then, quote, you won't have to annoy me with your questions. So I said, I have a better idea. Why don't I go find this Dr. Susan Love and see if she would like to be my surgeon, which is what I did. Now, I bring this up not because one doctor is better than another, although we all know that's true. Some doctors are better than others. I bring it up because if you find yourself in the position of dealing with the medical community and you have a life-threatening disease, it's truly important to remember who actually owns the disease. And it's not the hospital, and it's not the doctors, it's not the nurses, it's not your friends, it's not your family, it's certainly not your HMO. You own the disease. And I wanted to learn so that I could be a partner in my treatment. I did not want to make the decisions that my doctors would make, but I wanted to know what was going on. Well, imagine in my learning process how surprised I was to learn that we had not come nearly as far as I would have thought in our knowledge about or treatment of breast cancer. No one knows what causes breast cancer. No one knows how to prevent it, and no one knows how to cure it. Basically, they know how to cut us, burn us, and poison us. And I'm not bad-mouthing that because it works a lot. And doctors are on our side. It's not at all that they're against us, but as my own surgeon said, one day in the future, they will look back and call us barbarians because we didn't know more to do for you. The next thing I began to notice was how vulnerable having breast cancer made me feel. I noticed that part immediately. For years, I'd been cast as sort of this tough dame, and although it wasn't true, I went along with it because it was better than having people think you were a wuss. But now they seem to have found my Achilles heel, though certainly it was not a heel we were speaking of. And I began to notice that when you have cancer, people's attitude towards you changes. For one thing, most people are very nice to you, and if you're a journalist, that takes some getting used to. But many aren't sure how to be nice to you or what to say about what has happened, or if in fact they should say anything at all. Many people do not know how to behave around someone who has cancer. I first noticed this on the day I've come to think of as the day of the bad mammogram. For instance, the radiologist did not look at me and say, you know, we've just done 4 sets of mammograms on your 2 breasts. And after looking at these things for 10 years every day, I'd bet my MD parking permit it's cancer. No, she looked at me and she said, you're fine, and I want you to go home now and call your doctor immediately, and will you be okay getting home alone? Her eyes, though, she looked at me just as if I was a person who had cancer. It was a look I came to know, and it wasn't just the doctors. Even well-meaning friends didn't know the right thing to say, and so they said all kinds of silly things. When I would call them to tell them I had cancer, many, before the word cancer was out of my mouth, would say, oh, don't worry, you'll be fine, I just know. How? I didn't know. The doctors didn't know. How do you know? Others would say, cancer? Are you sure? The reaction I appreciated most, although it was vulgar, came from an old friend, a man named Lloyd Dobbins, a Southerner with whom I had worked on several television shows in the 70s and 80s. I called him on the phone. I told him I had cancer. There was a long pause, and then he said, well, shit. My sentiments exactly. Here are some other moments from the few months during my treatment. "How are you?" says the network producer at the anchorman's dinner party. "Fine," I say, trying to remember her name. No, I mean, "How are you?" "I'm really fine." "Why can't I remember this woman's name?" "Are you really, really fine?" "Now I remember why I can't remember this woman's name. She's an idiot." "No, I'm not fine. I have cancer. I've had surgery. I lost both my breasts. Every 21 days, a very small nurse puts a very large needle in me. Every morning I get up to see if my hair stayed in bed, and one day it did. But I'm here. Can we talk about something else?" A television reporter I had dated when God was a lad says to me, "You know, people would notice less if you'd stop straightening your jacket every 5 minutes. Don't be so self-conscious about having no breasts." "Thank you. I wasn't really feeling self-conscious until now." Another woman, "Linda Jane, do not worry. We are going to beat this thing." Now, this is my friend Margaret, a good woman, a woman of many enthusiasms, and she means well. And she goes on, "We're going to get our diet right, and we're going to exercise, and we're going to do what the doctors say, and we're going to win." Thank you, Margaret. I'm so glad we're in this together. How about you take the chemo next month? Another man, a former anchor man with much to be modest about, says to me one day, you know him, "Linda, my dear, you look grand, simply grand. I mean, considering." On the whole, my men friends assured me I would still be sexy. My women friends assured me I would live. But I'll tell you who knows best how to talk to someone with cancer, and that is another person who has had cancer. When I was first diagnosed, it never occurred to me to keep this a secret. I knew that I would need to draw my friends and family around me like an old quilt to get through this. Only I had a tiny problem. After 25, 30 years as a journalist, many of my friends were journalists. So I asked them all, I said, "Please, let me just get my arms around this first. I'm not going to be secretive about it. I promise I'll talk. But just for right now, let me get used to it." And they were very good. Everybody in the national media knew that I had breast cancer. And nobody said a word for 3 months. And then a reporter for USA Today called my office, and he got my assistant, and he said, "Well, we're going to go with this story." And she said, "Well, I'm not going to confirm it." And he said, and I quote, "Well, everybody in the business knows that Linda Ellerbee had to have both her tits cut off." So the next day, USA Today did go with the story, more elegantly worded. And I was very hurt at the time. I thought rather, as Arthur Ashe had one day said, when USA printed that he had AIDS, since I was not running for office or taking government money, why was it anyone's business but my own? I now think I owe USA Today a debt, because what happened was that I instantly joined the world's largest support group. I began to get mail from women all over this country whom I have not met and who I will never meet. And strangers would stop me in the airport. Women would stop me on the street, and they would come up to me, and they would tell me their stories. And their stories and their mail sustained me, and it gave me courage, and it gave me the honesty to face my disease. And the other extremely important thing it gave me was they gave me permission to laugh in the face of a life-threatening disease. And I came to find humor in the situation because there is. And you really don't have to look very far for it. You just have to be open to it. And it may be a kind of dark humor, but it's very useful. For example, when I was diagnosed, I called my daughter, who was at the university in Seattle at the time, and I live in New York City. And she said, "I'll get on a plane and be right there." And I said, "No, I know you have exams coming up, final exams. You'll be here when I'm going through chemo. I'll see you then." So she did not come for the surgery. And when she came home, she flew in from Seattle, and she got an earlier flight. And since nobody in New York City goes to the airport to meet anyone after they're over age about 10, I didn't know she'd gotten the earlier flight, and I didn't meet her plane. And she came to the house, and she didn't see me, and she ran upstairs, and she didn't see me, and she saw the bathroom door shut, and she opened it. Now, I want you just to stop for a moment and imagine this picture. Here's what she saw. A woman with no breast and no hair, naked in front of a mirror, very carefully applying lipstick. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, Mama, you look just like Buddha, only without the wisdom." I went to a wig store to buy a wig. You do this before your hair falls out. And a friend went with me. And we told the sales lady in the wig store why we were there. And both my friend and I began to try on wigs. You know, I mean, some of them are really funny. You put on a big blonde one, it's Dolly Parton, with a couple of fairly major exceptions. And we were laughing and having a good time. And the sales lady came over to my friend and said in a voice that I guess she thought I couldn't hear, she said, "You should not laugh about this. It is not appropriate to laugh about this. What your friend is going through is serious." And I turned to her and I said, "You know, cancer is serious. Buying a wig is only important." And I came to find that even tasteless humor was very helpful. And I suppose under that heading, my favorite story is about the day I went out to exercise my arm after surgery by throwing the ball for my golden retriever. Now, I had brand new prosthesis, and I had a little T-shirt, cute little thing. And I threw the ball, and I threw the ball. And after a while, the dog got tired, and he dropped the ball at my feet, and I bent over to pick it up. And one of my cute little prostheses fell on the ground. And the dog grabbed it. And the dog ran off down the street with it. And I ran off down the street after the dog, shouting, "Give me my breast!" I said, "Give me my breast right now!" to a dog. And finally, a bolt from sanity struck from nowhere, and I realized what I was doing. And I sat down on the curb, and I began to laugh. And I laughed until I cried. You are going to cry. There is no rule that says you may not laugh. So I took my laughter from the women who said, "Yes, laugh," and my courage. And the women who have come up to me at events tonight and said, "Look at me, 20 years. Look at me, 30 years." Well, I look and I learn and I hope and I fight. But in the beginning, I started to notice something pretty silly. Women were supposed to suffer in silence with breast cancer. Maybe even die politely. My mother's best friend had had breast cancer when I was a little girl, and it was never spoken of except in whispers. And I thought about that. And I thought, if we hadn't been conditioned to be so silent and so polite, maybe we would know more about breast cancer today. We are much farther along on some other cancers. There are tests for some other cancers. We know more about them. And then I thought, I wonder if this has anything to do with the fact that breast cancer is primarily a woman's disease. For instance, mammography is an incomplete tool. It's not the test that we all want for this disease, but it is, along with self-exams and regular exams by your doctor, the best we have. And a mammogram can save your life. It saved mine. But if we want more, we have to raise our voices and fight together. The good news is that has been done. Since the 90s, the early 90s, women have been raising their voices. Now, I like to think it's because so many women my age got breast cancer, and we were always a noisy generation. I'm from the 60s. I like a little noise. And we're not going to be quiet now, and we're not going to go away. We're not going to suffer in silence or die politely, and we're not going to be ignored. Now, you want to know what noise can do? It's an underrated thing. In 1991, the newly formed National Breast Cancer Coalition, which was to be the political activist arm for all of the various breast cancer groups, went to the White House with a petition. There were 600,000 signatures on this petition. It was for the president. And they wanted breast cancer to be made a national priority, and they wanted more money for the study of the disease. They were not allowed on the White House grounds. They were made to put the petition on the conveyor belt that sort of goes off into the White House, and they were sure went straight to the shredder with no stops at the Oval Office. A few years later, I stood in the East Room of the White House and watched another president and First Lady accept another petition. This one had 2.5 million signatures on it. The number accounted for the 2.5 million American women who had breast cancer, including the 1 million who don't know it yet. And as I stood there and I heard this president promise a national campaign and promise more money, I thought to myself, now, you might say it's because he's a Democrat and the other guy was a Republican. I don't think so. I don't think party politics had anything to do with it. Besides, I don't think that Bill Clinton loved his wife any more than Gerald Ford loved his wife or Ronald Reagan loved his. Bill Clinton loved his mother. I'm sorry, she was the one with breast cancer. I just think it was that so many more women had been diagnosed and decided not to be silent. But that's what noise does. It can change the course of a disease. In 1991, our government had earmarked $70 million for the study of breast cancer. Today, that figure is just under $800 million. So I say make a noise, make a big noise. And you say, but I'm just one person, what can I do? Well, you have no idea of your power. If you know what you are, what you stand for, and are willing to stand, you can accomplish a great deal. My favorite story that illustrates that, I took from the internet a few years ago, so I assume it's probably apocryphal. But it makes the point, I'm going to tell it anyway. It was January. The aircraft carrier Enterprise was on maneuvers off the coast of Newfoundland, and the weather was predictably horrible. And hi. The ship's radar, there. The ship's radar picked up in the distance what appeared to be a tiny ship, and although it was tiny, it did also appear to be on a collision course with the Enterprise. So the Enterprise radioed, "We are an American warship. Divert to the south." And the message came back, "You divert to the north." And so they radioed back, "We are an American warship. Divert to the south." And again, the message came back, "You divert to the north." And so with all of the arrogance of size and might, they radioed, "We are the United States Aircraft Carrier Enterprise. You divert to the south." And the message came back, "We are a lighthouse. Your call." So I say to you that if you can't be the Enterprise, each one of you can be the lighthouse. And this I know too. I'm a better person for having had cancer. In my case, and when it comes to cancer, every person's case is different. This is made easier by the fact that I am, 11 years later, by all available tests, clear of cancer. And I'm happier than I've ever been. But wait a minute, you don't have any breasts. True enough. And I remember the day the bandages came off. I looked down. The doctor said, "Don't worry, the black and blue and yellow parts will go away." I looked down again. Looks to me as if everything has gone away. My surgeon told me then of a patient who had come in for her one-year checkup after having a double mastectomy. The surgeon asked the woman how she was adjusting, and the woman said, "Fine. I'm perfectly fine about this whole thing. I'm fine. Let's talk about something else." Well, my surgeon got concerned, and the woman got very quiet and angry, and it turned out that in the whole year, the woman had never once looked at herself in the mirror. Well, I wasn't going to be that woman. I was going to face my disease and my chest honestly. So I began going to the gym to work out. Getting breast cancer had scared me into taking a little better care of the only body I was likely to get. However, I had a tiny problem at the gym. In the locker room at my gym, women walked around wearing no clothes. They did not wear bathing suits in the steam room. They did not go to the showers wearing T-shirts. At first, I thought I would drape a towel around me at all times, and then I decided I would not hide my lack of breast as if I were ashamed of having had cancer. After all, it was a disease, not a moral failing. Besides, maybe if she saw what cancer had done to me, a woman might make sure she got that mammogram, the one I'd been lazy about getting, until I finally went in and it was too late. But when I saw what I could only describe as the shock and horror in the eyes of the women who looked at my scarred chest, I quickly went back to covering myself with a towel. Apparently, talking about breast cancer was one thing, looking at it was another. Later that year, the New York Times Sunday magazine ran a cover photograph of a model who had had breast cancer. In the photo, the side where she had the mastectomy, where she had no breast, was uncovered. The side where she still had a breast was covered. Well, this photograph caused a large stir. Many women wrote in who had mastectomies. Many women who had had mastectomies wrote in saying, "How dare you show people what we look like?" Others who had not had breast cancer said it was indecent, pornographic or something. Well, I was confused. At the newsstand where I had bought the New York Times that morning, there were many magazines with covers of women baring their breasts, and nobody was complaining about those. If showing breasts was okay, why was showing the absence of breasts not okay? Finally, I came to understand that fear was the issue. That photograph of the model, the sight of my chest, it frightened women. This could happen to you, was what it said. When women looked at my chest, they saw their own mortality. No wonder they didn't want to look. Who could blame them? Well, I did, for a while. And then I decided we each must deal with our feelings about our bodies in our own way. For instance, although I live in America, where breasts are a big deal, I now know with all my heart that I do not judge my femininity or my sexuality by body parts. And happily, neither does Rolf, and we are celebrating 16 years this month, 11 of those since I got cancer. My life is good. I may not have breasts, but I have love that is returned. My children are healthy and interesting. We actually like one another. I have work I love. I have health insurance, and I'm alive. I have never been quite so alive. I have the energy of 3 women 10 years younger than I am. And on my birthday every year, I go out into the wilderness with my backpack and everything I need in it for about a week. And I listen. And I understand what a gift life is. And I tell you, when you turn 58 on a cliff, doing the salute to the sun as it comes up in the morning, as I did this last August, 58 doesn't feel old. And I go around saying thank you a lot, because I'm a healthy and grateful woman. Now, if you think I sound like Pollyanna, if you think I'm trying to put a good face on a bad deal, let me tell you about a lunch we have in New York every year. It is a lunch to celebrate life. The idea was Betty Rollins. I had first met Betty back when both of us were correspondents for NBC News. Betty got breast cancer in the 70s and wrote a book called First You Cry. I had read it back then, and then I put it away because what did it have to do with me? In the last year since I was diagnosed, we had become closer friends, and she called me and she said she was so tired of women with breast cancer being portrayed only as victims, with all of the emphasis on death and disfigurement. She wanted to know if I thought it would be a good idea to throw a lunch to celebrate our being alive. And I said it was a great idea, and it was. That first year at the Plaza Hotel, there were 400 of us. We were all spiffed up and looking good. You know, and some of us had no hair, and some of us wouldn't be alive much longer. But that day, we took a shot of courage from each other, and we had a good time. And Betty had sent a note to each woman before the lunch and asked us each to write on a card one good thing that had happened to us since having cancer. And that day, Betty and I read the list, and I'm just going to tell you a few of the things women wrote. Found friends I never knew I had. Began and completed a degree in art history. Became closer to God. Learned to travel for enjoyment. Learned how to fight for myself. Got married. Got divorced. They both seemed happy. Learned to let go. Bought a red car. Learned to feel and sustain joy. Saw my son become President of the United States. Now, we weren't all lying. I want to be plain here. Having cancer is terrible, and too many people die of it. And I would rather have my breast back on the whole. But some days I don't feel like a survivor. Some days I feel like a victor. That's not enough. I love it when I stand and say that. But I have to still remember how many women die from this disease. Carol Nealon and I met in 1973. We were both reporters. She was the better one, a world-class journalist who practiced in local television news, the arena which so many of us at the networks liked to make fun of. After I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I got to know Carol better. They had found mine in 92, they had found hers in 89. And although I was older than she was, when it came to cancer, I was the rookie and she was the veteran. Or maybe the smart, pretty girl 2 classes ahead, the one who has it all nailed. Cancer's hard, and you're scared. And one of the things you're scared of is being shown up for the coward you're sure you are. You know that being brave, or at least acting brave, is the thing to do, but it just seems like the wrong time to do it. Late at night, deep into the Sinatra hours, when the dragons roam and sleep is a distant dream, you lie there thinking about dying, and you start to ask the why me questions and the what does it all mean questions. Any of the ones that have no answer will do. And that's when you find something to hang on to. Well, I'd pray, and I'd think of Carol. She was beating this thing, yes. And soon the dragons would start to get hazy around the edges, and my breathing would settle back to normal, and the spirit would rest. And then the road got rougher. I'd always assumed if the cancer came back, you were a dead woman, probably the next day. But Carol's cancer had returned, and she wasn't dead or even whining. This passionate, unsentimental woman was taking big bites, running a newsroom, riding rivers, hiking, loving her husband, Dave, giving herself up and over to life and still winning. And I guess I thought she'd always win. We said goodbye in the middle of January. She was at home, surrounded by her family and by love and accepting of her death. She was even laughing. I was not. It wasn't fair, I cried. Hadn't she beaten everything the disease had thrown at her? Carol reminded me that it really had nothing to do with breast cancer, that none of us knows how long we have. She said when she woke up that morning, she had that moment, same as anyone else. And the moment after that was always up for grabs. For her, for me, for you, for any of us. Carol's moments ran out. But I've come to understand how right she was. And that information now colors the moments of my days. We shine, we do. We plant trees that won't be big enough to climb until we're too old to climb trees. We write constitutions to protect the rights of people who won't be born for another 100 years yet and might not be worth the trouble anyway. And we try to take care of our sick, though we all suffer from a disease for which there is no cure and no hope for one. We will not last, and we know we will not last. And still we write, carve, build, paint, and plant to last. Yes, we stand alone in life, but sometimes we stand alone together. We are even brave enough to love one another, knowing we must lose one another. We are brave enough to give birth to more humans, knowing we must lose them too. Everybody dies, and everybody knows that everybody dies. To live as if this were not so makes us giants. And what we lack in distance, we make up for in height. And once in a while, we stand tall enough to touch the sky, look the sun straight in the eye, and laugh. To me, that laughter is the finest sound there is. It is the sound of the human spirit, the sound of life. It is the best thing about us, and it lasts until the game is called on account of darkness. So if I can sum up about what I've learned about the changes in my life in these last 11 years, well, first of all, I've learned there's the change you choose and the change that chooses you. I'd learned the easier a change was to make, usually the less it mattered, which makes it even more necessary for us to choose change from time to time, because change can be a form of hope. To risk change is to believe in tomorrow. And that is a gift we need later more than sooner. Somebody once said, only the very young can afford hopelessness. Only the very young have time for it. Yet with all this change, I'm still me, and that's an important lesson. We need to remember that just because everything has changed, it doesn't mean everything is different. What I'm trying to say is that cancer is a part of my past. It is a part of my present because I choose to speak about it. And for the same reason, it will be a part of my future. But it is not who I am. It is not who any of us are. And that's important to know. One day, and I hope to be around for that day, there will be a cure. And I don't believe that day is far away. And we will recount to a disbelieving audience what it was like back in the days when breast cancer killed people. In the meantime, let us all remember that losing a breast or both breasts can never be compared to losing a life. But lopping off body parts to cure a disease is a really weird idea. With that in mind, I would like to end, and then I'll answer questions, with the words of another survivor, a friend of mine named Susan Miller, who wrote a play called My Left Breast. I miss it, but it's not a hand. I miss it, but it's not my mind. It's not me. I miss it, but there's something growing in its place, and it is not a tougher skin. My heart, it's closer to the air now. This line, this scar, a visible reminder of the impermanence of me. A line that suggests I take it seriously, which I do. Oh, I miss it. But I would still like to say to women everywhere, we are still beautiful. We are still sexy. We are still powerful. And we are still here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The woman dribbles.